Under the Malacca Tree, a fiction. This story concerns the legendary founding of the colonial trading city of Malacca. According to the legend, the warlord Paraswarama, also known as Iskander or Alexander Shah, was escaping from various conflicts in the southern parts of the Malay Peninsula when he rested under a tree beside a river. As he sat there, he watched as one of his dogs chased out mouse deer from the undergrowth. The mouse deer, though, outsmarted the dog, and the dog fell into the river. Thereupon, the warlord, we are told, took this as an omen and decided to settle in that place, and he called it Malacca because he had been resting under a Malacca tree at the time. There are many variations on this, but that is the basic story. This was before the arrival of the Portuguese, and then the Dutch, and then the British after them. Paraswarama was originally a Hindu, but converted to Islam and took the name Muhammad Iskander. It was common for Malay princes and pretenders to claim descent from Alexander the Great. He figures as the great local hero in popular legend in Malacca, and the mouse deer is now the emblem of the city. In the centre of Malacca city today, there is a public sculpture depicting the mouse deer chasing the hunting dog. In this story then, we have the narrator's rambling conjectures about this tale. Primarily, he proposes that perhaps the story of the Malacca tree, the deer, the dog and the river, is an allegory for some astrological configuration. It was commonplace in pre-modern times for people to consult the stars when they founded a city. Many foundation legends are really allegories about the stars. Perhaps this foundation legend is also. Perhaps it concerns constellations. Perhaps the tree is the cosmological world tree. Perhaps the story concerns the dog star setting or falling into the river of the horizon. The author gives a sketch of such a reading and delves into several earlier texts for clues. Along the way, he also muses as to whether the story is not alchemical, and in this context he relates the story of the man from Sumatra who was offered the elixir of life but rejects it because it is too simple. This becomes the author's own allegory about Malacca. It is axiomatic that Malacca was a great centre of Chinese alchemy, enriched by the Arab and Hindu traditions, and is defined by its deceptive simplicity. In the end, Alexander Shah determines not to be like the man from Sumatra, and in this way he gives the city its distinctive spirit. The recipe for the elixir of life is on sale in Blacksmith Street. The author turns the legend of Paraswarama into a sort of Baroque meta-allegory of vaguely alchemical pretensions. Under the Malacca tree, there sat Alexander Shah, a man of purpose and of destiny. His dog, Ringbark, so named with obvious caricatures of his barking tone, sniffed out wriggling foragers in the understory on the banks of the languid river. Fronds of the sweet coconut defined the nearby village. The stars wheeled overhead, redoubtably equatorial, except, of course, in the theatres of the mind. Local legends spoke of dragons eating glowing pearls and other familiar motifs. The exact whereabouts, the very axis, is unknown. The unique laws of narrative that govern the founding of cities must prevail. From high on the hill there is a purview of the sea, and some, in defiance of plain topography, put our hero there, and the tree in question is later replaced by a Portuguese crucifixion in dark teak within the cathedral's imposing apse. This neat theology, however, undermines the whole point of the drama. Up comes a mouse deer that outwits the canine that falls in the river. Skill conquers savage teeth. This could only have occurred on the mudflat. It is inconceivable that Alexander Shah was sitting up on St. Paul's Hill while Ringbark frolicked with the deer down below. But whatever the case, there he sat, and somehow the mouse deer gave the hunting dog a swimming lesson. At this, moreover, the founding father sat up, peered upon the strange becomings, and when Ringbark came sulking back as wet as a rag, he said, "Let us reside here, Ringbark, and let us call it Malacca, for here I have enjoyed the fervent shade." And implicit was a natural element, that here even the mouse deer, skinny things with prancing toe bolts and placid grins, can defend such a stronghold from the dogs of lost invaders. It was an omen, surely. This at least is an outline of events related in the stolid but multicoloured Malay chronicles, a voluminous thing, herein notoriously translated into appalling English by Gustav Holdencraft of the Vienna School of Southeast Asian Legal Codes. For Alexander Shah, far from being lost among the coastal jungles, was a lawgiver unto his people. One is reminded of Greek chieftains trotting around the boot of Italy and calling it home. In those days, a sacred fire was transposed from hearth to hearth in healthy heathen rites. Even so, the true act of founding is the marking of a centre and the axis mundi of the new abode. Trees and fire pits are interchangeable. His Shardom snapped, and suddenly the impetus of the heavens shaped subsequent events. The planets know fateful moments when they see them. There is a coagulation of reality. Myths grab history by the throat. It is supposed, therefore, that probably Alexander walked into the clearing and looked into the misty firmament and saw the twinkling mouse deer and her 7 silver sisters churn in the dark bowl of upwardness as the little dog wheeled around Sirius and Aldebaran until at last chased into the watery nether below the western rim. Malay warlords do not believe in gross coincidence. The astrologer in his retinue, every warlord had one, would have said, "Whoa!" Then Alexander made his omen concrete. King is he who notes the raw interstitialisms of nature. Our best source, one would think, would be a Scotsman giving a first-hand account. In this case, no, because J.K. Maclean, a dissolute armchair scholar from Glasgow, was once trapped in the islands by a wily monsoon. He was witness to Malacca in his sailing days. His written accounts, however, are not merely so random and unreliable as to be thoroughly hallucinatory and a quirky gem of weird colonial literature. He seems to have spent almost his entire sojourn in an opium den on Hareen Street. In his version, Maclean presents Alexander Shah as the marauding hero who tames the cosmic monster in its timid disguise. Then the author, so-called, goes on for another 20 pages about the lovely virtues of the local girls. In an addendum, he mentions that the famous tree still stood in those days, where the clock tower is today, and how one day the people chopped it down and turned it into jewellery boxes to sell to the tourists pouring in from Singapore. You miss the irony if you don't know the history well. Alexander Shah, you see, had escaped from Singapura and had visited his mother in Muar before striking forth to found a new city somewhat up the coast. Once again, we see how tourism is counter-historical. A short time after this, a boatload of rabbis arrived from Malabar. This fact precipitated into another proposal. According to some, the word itself devolved from Hebrew notes like Malkuth, kingdom, and Malak, king. Thus the word Malacca, in context, signifies that place whereupon the king sat down, with a big clunky pun upon the Malacca tree under which he sat, which therefore has an entirely literary lifespan. The rabbis went at this problem with Talmudic fervour. They showed that such beginnings were, on balance, unlikely, The Jews in Penang know Yiddish, so don't have a clue. Alexander Shah went Mazel Tov, and for the first time Semitic merchants took their wares to outdoor bazaars. Maclean writes of meeting an old Jew named Maudie in Jonker Street, who sold him a lucky charm replete with Hebraic warbles, and how it helped him overcome a miserable disposition. More sober estimations doubt the derivation. Why go Hebrew, they say, when you can just as easily go Arabic, because Malaq is bold in that tongue too. Alexander Shah's real name after his conversion was Muhammad, and he was a blazing landmark for the Mohammedan faith, to be sure. Perhaps the pun is in the Arabic sense of humour, and the Jews are a fountain of commentary instead. Perhaps causations interlock and come to us in tangles of latitudinal meanings. The arrival of the Baghdadi Jews came when the British entrepot attracted merchants and goldsmiths in droves. It lasted all the way until World War II. Then they all moved to Australia. These days a synagogue couldn't fetch a quorum. Maudie, however, so Maclean relates from within his opiated sanctum, had a friend, Lionel, a Chinaman who lived in Blacksmith Street and knew the secret of metals. He was called before the Shah, who said, "Am I mistaken, O Smith, in supposing that the mouse deer in the story is an allegory of the catalyst that turns the alchemical transformations?" This was real magic they were talking about. The Shah had, by decree, banished proto-Jungians from the narrative altogether, and would not countenance a collective unconscious. This is how we can be sure that our symbols do not disappear in complex knots of personality. Critics claim this is anachronistic, but fools mess up things in every age. Maclean went wayward once again. Lionel, the Red Lion in this alchemical drama, is supposed to have replied something cryptic, and suddenly the Shah was healed of spotty sweats. Maclean's own Malay chronicles, if we can call them that, are full of magical healings. For the most part, Maclean merely imagined them or imported them from Herodotus. This is the upplay of it. The best story concerns the time a man from Sumatra came in search of the fabled elixir. Every Taoist in Blacksmith Street kept the recipe in his travel bag. The man from Sumatra rushed into the first shop he reached and purchased a copy of the recipe for a substantial sum. But when he took the recipe away and stopped and read it, he was so shocked at how simple it was, and made from such everyday ingredients, that he was sure he had been hoodwinked. He took the recipe back to the shop where he had purchased it and demanded his money back. The shopkeeper was happy to oblige. "Try to swindle me, will you?" said the man from Sumatra. And so he went into the next shop. There the shopkeeper sold him the recipe for the fabled elixir, this time for an even higher price. But when he took it away and read it, the man from Sumatra found it was exactly the same as the first recipe. Outraged, he marched back to where he bought it and demanded his money back. "These people selling cheap recipes are all swindlers," he declared, and determined that if he wanted the authentic thing, he must pay a higher price. So he found an exclusive salesman selling the guaranteed authentic recipe for this fabled elixir. "All your money back." The man from Sumatra purchased it, but once again he found the same simple recipe with simple household ingredients. In the end, he had tried all the relevant stores in Malacca. Disappointed, he took a barge back to Sumatra, setting out from Kampung Portuguese, and sniffed the stinging mystery, once again, of the black pepper trees. "Malacca," he says, "a city full of charlatans." At the end of the story there is this moral. The man from Sumatra was obstinate and blind with rancid expectations. The gift of ages was right in front of his face. He just couldn't believe it. Don't be like the man from Sumatra. A belief in simple things is supposed to be the very virtue of Alexander Shah. Very few things are as simple as a mouse deer. The Malacca tree cast, of course, as the cosmic pivot, the world tree of the tropics, that is simple too. The river is the boundary of the sky. Alexander Shah, you'll notice, was a man of nouns. His words were solid with sturdy hand grips. His ancestry gave him substance. It is little known that a certain stray of Malay princedom claimed to be the seed-bearing Alexander, the Great that is, traversed the Bay of Bengal and imparted his dignity to certain royal lines even before the Romans. The Romans frequented the shores of Cochin, of course, and Cochin and Malacca were like two naughty sisters only separated by happenstance. Anyway, Alexander of Malacca made a proud claim to Macedonian blood. Maclean makes pithy of it. "What piffle," he writes. "I've seen the man. He's as Greek as my big toe," by which he means not very Greek at all. But this is tedious obviousness. It is better to give a legend a go. Every city stands under heaven. Every city must be reconciled with the stars. The story of Alexander Shah under the Malacca tree is the vehicle of cosmic signatures. This is why there is a fountain and statues of white mouse deer scooting among the hills in the centre of the city today. Legendary founders seal a tryst betwixt the earth and the sky. The name Alexander carries the connotation philosopher king, this land of the sweet sap of palm flowers. Unhappy then is he who scoffs at trees and dogs named ringbark and at mouse deer. There is a deeper and more direct sense in which the city is cosmopolitan unto its laterite core. The Chinese went tin mining. Their homes are built from the limestone hills at Ipoh. The Portuguese traded with the Dutch in the twilight years of early modernity. The British won the settlement in a famous card game in 1839. Utilitarian understandings for such turns of history are inadequate. The plain fact is that Paraswarama, as he was otherwise recorded, took the gong. At first, as his name suggests, he was a Hindu, but one night the Rasul proclaimed the celestial dichotomy to him in his dreamscapes. Then he took the name Iskander. No doubt there are skeptics who will doubt even this, but it would be foolish to suggest that men in history never follow their dreams. The Victorian mythographer Sir Henry Cardwell noted the pertinent connection, although his work is now largely forgotten. The mythic founder hero, he observes, is a creature of the Axis, and so, of course, he is the recipient of dreams and omens from on high. It would appear, he surmised, that the repose, the dream, the conversion, and the declaration of the city's inception under the Malacca tree are motifs shuffling in the drifts of time. It has, he says, feeling phenomenological, the makings of a theophany. He wrote a sterling piece along these lines for the Crown Colonies Review. It was attacked as credible but presumptuous in the following edition by Professor Garnett of Huxley College. According to Sir Henry, we have a hero's journey infused with a semi-historical chieftain. As well as our tales, he says, there are natural twists and turns. The moment Alexander Shah sat down and let ringbark snuffle in the understory, he became the universal hero. No matter if in Borneo or New Guinea, Cardwell reposed, there are set steps for universal men. His perspective was ahead of his time. What all of this means is that somewhere within the fertile fulcrum of myth's ready fancy is the kernel of differentiation. There is a sense in which the historical wars in Singapura are awkward compared to mythological facts. It is easier to believe in dragons eating glowing pearls than in the well-documented Songkla uprising of 1784. Who does not want to be pervasive in the fervent shade under the Malacca tree as well? It is not insignificant that the foundation of the city took the form of a man sitting down to relax. Relaxation is a Malaccan testament. It is as though the Shah says, "What a good place to relax." and 100,000 Han Chinese suddenly agreed. The Indians find it relaxing too. It was much too relaxed for the Dutch, who tried to sell it to the Spanish, who at that time were having second thoughts about the Philippines. The British needed somewhere to stop in for a cup of tea between Hong Kong and Calcutta, thus the long fingers of destiny. Whoever Alexander Shah or Iskander Shah might have really been, he was shafted with the great pole of reality and stepped out of history into the realms of verisimilitude. Oh, shadows on the wall. Maclean doesn't quite go as far as Gustav Holdencraft, hallucinations notwithstanding. Celestial parallels abound in Holdencraft's tortured translation. Maclean is fond of giant lizards and other malformations when he is not frothing on about the girls he'd met in various bars and cafes. Ringbark shook off the river drips. The mouse deer pranced into the forest and disappeared below the black and green profusion. It was a hot night, and there were electrical storms clawing along the equator. The small village upon the river slowly descended into a nascent and primordial darkness. It was very quick to expand. Within a few decades it had become a thriving trading port, famous for sweet diversions. The Sultan of Perak eventually gave the Tamils permission to look at local women, and before you know it, it was a city of renown. The straits are sheltered waters. No great sea swell could ever gnaw at the seashore. There were once 2,000 ships loading wares along the gentle coastline. No one has yet suggested that Alexander Shah had this within his vision, although the founder hero is prescient and glimpses future glories. He himself ought to be a summation of its character. Once again we refer to his belief in simple things. This is indelible upon Malaccans, who are famous for it all along the maritime legs of the Silk Road. Another word for it is wholesome. The dragons eating glowing pearls is the moon in her eclipse. He is no dragon slayer, Alexander Shah. A mouse deer whoops his dog. His one quest is the shady longitude of a broad Malacca tree. A mouse deer dooms his dog to drink. The bold constellations all concur. He sums up the situation saying, "I know an omen when I see one," and he vows not to be the man from Sumatra.